Hi, this is Penny, also known as the Choco Kid, CHA_KID on Instagram and other places. Today we're going to look at the Aquanut March box. This is a subscription service that Aquanut, technically Xanadu Art Studio, offers. She's been coming out with 6 color packs, and you can subscribe and get the 6-pack. The dots are equal to about almost a half pan each. You get a variety of colors. This is the February box, was all reds and pinks. The March box here is in greens. I love that it came in this little case to protect it. There's some of the greens that you have, and I've just kind of color swatched off to the side so I can see. She included this awesome chart for you already on there, and she did a piece of art here which has a little fairy or angel girl, and she included a set for us. Margaret put this, she bought a big roll of the super heavyweight Arches paper, so this is really heavy, and you can see it's, you might be able to see it's kind of buckled here and a few other places. And I've had this, I've already wet this down and had it sitting under heavy books a couple of different times. I've taped it down and it's still being a bit hinky, so it's probably going to stretch out a little bit more. I love that she includes, this is one of the ways she's included it, but I love that she includes the charts. She loves making charts. I hate making charts, so it's really cool for me to get the pre-chart, because I do like to see the colors, and you can see I do the cheat quickie chart so I can just see what I'm using, but I prefer to paint rather than to do all the charts because I'm bad like that. So I'm going to use the greens from this month, probably a little bit of the reds. I've also got some other colors from her, different, these are half pans, some of the dots. I've also got, which I really love for portable travel, to just show you the size difference. These are half pans, and these are like quarter pans. You can see how many I can fit into just a teeny little box. This is an Altoids box. This is a Mickey or Minnie Mouse box. It's just a teeny bit smaller, and I was still able to get 24 colors in there, which is pretty cool. I like to do that. I will show you how this is. This isn't as good for at home with regular brushes, but when I'm using things portably, I always have an aqua brush with me, and that makes that useful very much, because you'll notice I have these little holes into my other ones because I use an aqua brush all the time. So when I'm using the aqua brush, I end up creating these little holes. So for an aqua brush, the little dots are about perfect size, and I can make all the little holes I want. It's just the right size. So I use that a lot when I'm portable. If I have the chance, though, I prefer to use more water, and on something like this little angel girl, water is going to be useful because it's the heavyweight paper. I also find when I'm painting at home, a lot of times, even other places, I do like to prop my work up just a little bit. I don't like enough of an angle so that it drips all over the time if I don't want it to, but sometimes I'll just throw a roll of tape under there or something and just change the angle just a little bit to make it a little easier to paint. And let's go ahead and wet her down and see what we've got. I would be embarrassed to tell you how many watercolors I have, let alone how many of the Aquadot colors I have from Xanadu. I love their paints, are extremely good quality. Of course, I have Schminky, I have Daniel Smith, I have my Da Vinci, which I love, all of them. But I really love my Aquadot colors. Not only do they have a lot of pigment, they flow really well, but they've got an amazing amount of other stuff in there. She has a lot of sparkle in a lot of her things. That's one of her things. She loves to sparkle and shine, Margaret. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. I always thought, sparkle, shine. I don't think I want all that sparkly crud on my paintings. You know, I've come to really love it and have that extra little bit in there and just make it special. And you can't tell in the photographs on a lot of the paintings that I do that I've actually got that sparkle from the Aquanut paints, but It's really cool to have it. And when you see them up close, it's like, wow, this is way cooler than I thought it was going to be. And it is. I did a bunch of Christmas cards with the Christmas dots this year. And I'll tell you, I made a whole bunch of cards. I painted all kinds of things. And I hardly scratched the surface of my dots. I'm kind of looking forward to keep collecting them for a little bit. And they're super portable. I can put a whole bunch of them, or even just tuck one right into a book I'm using. I have multiple notebooks, so it's kind of hard to say, oh, I only use one notebook. I don't, and I'm one of those weird people that uses multiple notebooks at the same time. It depends on what I feel like and where I'm going and what I'm going to use that day. So I'll pick out, or try to pick out, an appropriate book at the time. I'm just kind of wetting down the paper here. This paper will take a lot of wet because it's so thick. And I want to be able to get some wet effects and put some background on here. So I want to just get it nice and wet. And when you think it's not wet enough, especially with this thick of paper, a lot of times it is not wet enough. They want you to let the shine go a little bit away from it when you do it. But, so I'm going to save the green like Margaret did for the wings and stuff, I think. So I'm going to switch it up and paint my girl. Paint the background and paint the girl. When I see her, and when I think of fairies, a lot of times I see their wings. And a lot of times they look like leaves or flowers or other plants or other things that they could use. So I like to think that they're using them as camouflage a lot of times. And in this case, she looks almost to me like she's sleeping. Now, on Margaret's, she kind of did hers upright. And she's got some gold gilding on there and some spots and some cool things. And she did her hair really cool. She hand sketched all these up for us. But I want to be able to put in something different. When I see her either as like a little girl, like a little seed almost growing, so she could be underground, or she could be at the top of a flower, and she's kind of camouflaged and using her wings as her camouflage, as I kind of sort of think they would. So I'm going to put in some background colors. Since I'm thinking she's kind of seedy, I'm going to use one of the new fancy colors I just got this last month. She has some marvelous yellows. I didn't know how much I liked yellows till I started using some of the Xanadu yellows. I was told this is a fluorescent yellow. I guess that makes sense. It's pretty darn bright. And I just want to get some of this color in here around her. When the paper's wet, it lets it bleed out really nice and kind of blend better. And I just want to get that in there. I might just do that like she's on a flower. I'm kind of liking that idea. Maybe I'll just spread this out a little bit more. Maybe there's actually some sun up in here. Margaret likes to drop colors in, and I do too, but they don't always go exactly where you want, so you're just going to smear some more of that in there. Some of those will get taken up as we go. I think I want to put some blue in there so that it looks like she has some sky in her background. So I'm going to take one of these. I've got some of my little ones. Like I said, these won't work as good with my bigger brush, but they still work. And, ooh, this is a really good looking sky color. Let's try this one. Put some of that in there. I like teals and turquoises, so it's kind of fun to have it splattered in there. One of the big reasons to do the color charts ahead of time, which is one of the reasons I know Margaret tells us she likes to do it a lot, is she likes to see how the colors are going to mix and make sure they mix pretty before she ruins a painting. Some of that is the magic and the fun of it, is just being able to do that. I just kind of like to remember and think about the color chart and the color wheel, so I know that if I put some kind of a bluish color next to a yellowish color and they touch, I'm going to get some greenish color. Now that's not always true in paints, especially with watercolors. Watercolors can be made out of a single pigment, or they can be made out of multiple pigments. And I know that Xanadu and Margaret uses a lot of different pigments in theirs. They don't always use the same ones. They use 2 or 3 or sometimes more, but usually you'll find 2 to 3 is pretty common in most paints. If you look at any of your paint things from Daniel Smith or any of those guys, you'll notice they use more than one pigment on most paints. The benefit of using a single paint color with a single pigment is that when you mix them, especially if you're going to mix a lot of colors and you prefer to mix your colors, that's a lot of times the best way to do it, because you'll know from your color chart exactly kind of what colors to expect when you mix them together. When you have colors that are made up of multiple pigments, so multiple colors, you're never quite sure how they're going to mix unless you do a color chart ahead of time. And since we all know I'm loath to do that, when I am mixing, especially if I have portable kits where I don't have multiple colors, I will go ahead and I've cultivated kits that have a lot of single colors, so I know that when I mix them they'll be okay. If you're going to use other pigments or other colors that have multiple pigments, then you might want to do the color charts like Margaret suggests, so that you know exactly what's going on. But I still find a lot of times I get the ballpark idea if I've gone ahead and used, if I'm just thinking of the color chart, I can get a pretty good idea of how things are going to go together. Might not be perfect, might not land right all the time, but most of the time it'll come out pretty okay. If you want to be creative, watercolors is one of the best things to do that with, because things don't go your way, and a lot of times you're trying to figure out, okay, what can I do with this now that it didn't do what I thought it was going to do or what I wanted it to do? How can I make that better? Get some color in here. I'm also starting to darken up just a little bit around her wings. You can wait till it dries. Sometimes my patience level isn't that good, and I don't want this video to take all day. And I know I want to get some darks in there. This helps them bleed back into the background a little bit because it's wet, but you can bleed into other areas and cause yourself more problems, and it's not as defined. And it's hard to smooth it out because it wants to bleed rather than being able to smooth it like it did here. It smoothed out rather than bleed in because I swiped it. But we'll just get her going a little bit. And that's not a bad start. So a lot of times for color harmony, they'll tell you to pick like 3 colors that you really want to use. I've started with 3 colors just in the background here. Re-soften up a few of those edges, give myself a little bit more room to work into. Now I think I'm going to go ahead and fill in some of my leaves here, or fill in her body work. And I'm trying to decide what kind of colors I want to do. It's nice to start lighter and work darker. Watercolors are different than acrylics because you can paint over the top of acrylics. They're also a little different than oil because you usually paint over and work your way up through your colors. With watercolors, you paint backwards. So you want to leave white spaces open if possible, because you can't get your whites back without putting them in artificially. And you want to keep things so that you can continue to darken up and pull things out. So a lot of times in watercolor, it's better to start with lighter washes, which means you have more water with your color, or that you have, just a minute here, I'm going to get myself a mixing pan so I can mix some colors out if I want to. It's also a good way to wash your colors out. option. I think I'm just going to go straight into here. I think the basil and the wasabi are both really nice colors. Some of the paints have more sparkle than others. It looks like the wasabi has just a little bit less sparkle, and I want to use one of the little bit more sparkles like ocean greens later. So I'm going to just start off with some wasabi in here. And I'm going to use this. This is called dry brush just because it's technically the watercolors. I'm working wet on dry here. My brush has a lot of water, so it's not exactly dry brush. I would dry out my brush more, but I don't have the area here pre-soaked like I did with the background. I'm actually just going ahead and putting some color on here. So I'm getting some of the similar effect just because I have so much water on my brush, it's flowing well. I want to give some of that a chance to work into those edges, I think, while they're still a little wet. Now butterflies' wings, if you look at them, are very segmented. So you can do little segments and cut out little areas for you to have different colors. We'll do some more of that in a little bit. In its more formalized form, it's called negative painting, where we're going to cut out different areas. And we'll do some of that too. Probably down in the flower a little bit more. With watercolors, also, a lot of times, the color that you put down, it looks great, and you're like, oh, that's the right amount, that's how much color I wanted. But with watercolors, depending how much water is in there and what kind of paper you have, this is pretty thirsty paper because it's so thick, it's going to absorb a lot of that color in there, and it's going to lighten up as it dries. So you're going to be like, hey, I had the perfect color, what the heck? That's why. So a lot of times you're going to have to go back in after and put in other layers of color. Oh, that was a little too wet. Let's dry that up a little bit. Don't want it quite that soggy. Go ahead and put that in there just a little bit. Roxy Lou, what are you doing? Don't mind me. I've got 3 little schnauzer girls. So if you hear me talking to somebody other than myself or you, it's probably my schnauzers. Okay, we got some of that in there. Some of these other ones are really pretty. You can see they get darker as they go down. These two are a little bit lighter, kind of mid, and then they get really dark. And that one's really dark. It's a really gorgeous color. I think I want to go the next level here. Hey, why don't we just stick on that? I'm going to use some of the golf. I'm going to use some of that golf over here. Just line out some of the areas that I've already been doing. And see, this brush holds so much water, I don't need to go back and put water on it every 5 seconds. It's one of my favorites. I've tried quite a few brushes at this point. I don't usually take this one when well, it depends. If I've got a big kit with a big paint set, portability, and I'm bringing water and everything, but for like daily work, when I'm at work and I'm doing painting on the fly over a break, I usually just use the aqua brush. But this is one of my favorites, and you can tell it is a travel brush. The lid comes off and covers over the back. The disadvantage is the lid comes off your handle, sometimes too much, a little too fast. I've got just a little cloth on the side that I can wipe off some of that excess water with. See how the water spreads. Sometimes you want that effect, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you get it whether you want it or not, so you just work with it. Then you can go from there. Hopefully I won't totally lose all those cute curly cues. I'll probably have to bring them out later. Later as I go back in. I think I want to get some of the darks in there too. I'm just going to let that take a breather for a minute, and I'm going to go in and work on painting my little girl here for a second. So, Margaret has some of my favorite cheats in the universe. She doesn't like to redo the same colors ever. She likes to do different colors all the time. And there's one color she does keep in stock most of the time, at least some version of it, and that's flesh. She usually has a pink flesh or a flesh tone or a medium flesh or a dark flesh or some other ones, and those are like instant awesome. Doesn't mean I don't add other things to it, but it's often the best choice for a base for me. I've got some light flesh and some dark flesh here in my little teeny kit, so I'm going to use my medium flesh and just put some of that in there. And I'm going to start getting my girl a little bit of color here. Kind of seeing something different here. See if I can ease that up just a little bit. Originally, I was thinking that was just her hair sticking out. She's got her arm here, which is true, but I don't know how you sleep, but when I sleep, I usually have my arm sticking out. So I'm going to see if I can lighten up this yellow a little bit around there just in case. And maybe put a little extra flesh tone in there. Now, it doesn't matter if the colors bleed on top of each other. It's watercolor. That's the beauty of the system, actually. But sometimes you're like, oh, what the heck? You hear me tapping my brush on the side on my water thing. It's to get my point back because it'll spread out. It has to have the right amount of water, and then it just has to, but you get your better brushes and they go back to a nice point. This is my Rosemary & Company brush, and I just love it. They're out of the UK. You'll notice on here, one of the downsides of drawing in your lines for your artwork is pencil stays. So you want to put it in there, and sometimes you'll have to take it and make it lighter again, and sometimes you just have to make it part of your picture. But even if you do put lines down and you put them light and you try to erase them, a lot of times once you've put them on your paper, you've kind of gouged them into the paper. So you'll find that your watercolors will follow those lines sometimes and give you some less than pleasant extra features that you weren't planning on, which takes some of the fun out of it. So you kind of just gotta go as you go with it. Okay, I'm going to use some of the dark flesh now. Add a little bit of dark swim here. Okay, it's being a little grumpy. I won't lie, this little weirdy color I got here, it was a mystery color a month or so ago. It's got browns and golds and metallics and blues and greens and burgundy. It's got chunks of stuff in there. I've literally painted whole paintings and whole people out of here because I'll just kind of use the little bit more red bit like I'm using now to add some darks. And then I can use a little bit blues for something else. Pretty nice set. It's like one of my favorite, all-time favorite colors. Again, one of her one-off creations, so I get to enjoy it now, but might have trouble enjoying it later. So you can see how light this has gotten now in the background since as it's been drying. Where I put it down a little bit heavier, closer to her, it's a little lighter, which is cool. But other areas have dried. Even the darker greens have gotten a lot lighter since we initially put them in. And I think I want to put some more of that yellow in there. Yellow and green go great together, obviously because green has yellow in it. So I'm going to go ahead and add some of that in here because I think it'd be a really nice complement. And then if I have some greens that mix in there with it, it's just going to go ahead and make it more of a greenish color than a yellowish color, which is also okay. And then I know with the darker colors I can always darken it up some more. Okay, let that back off for a little bit. I gotta go soften some of these colors in her. They came out a little dark. Let's see if we can lighten up her little body just a little bit more. If you take a clean brush, put the right amount of water on there, so it'll take you a little bit to get used to how much water, because each brush is going to be different. But I can go back in here and remove some of that color and lighten her up a little bit in some of the areas that I want light. You can go in there literally and scrub the color out, and that's what they call it, scrubbing. I want it to be dark under her wings because she's going to have shadow there, but I figure her bum's going to have a little bit of a highlight on it. Down here where it's sticking out might have a little bit of a highlight on it. We can add some highlights in after artificially, but a lot of times I like to have at least some of it lightened up here this way. I can also go back in there and put a little bit more of the darks in there for a couple of the dark areas. She's really a teeny girl. You can see by my brushes how small she is, so just getting her lined up in here is going to be exciting. Trying to define that arm a little bit more. Define that arm a little bit more. I gotta scrub some more of this off. Because if she sleeps like me, this top arm is the one under her head, and the other one sticking out would be the one that's underneath her. So I gotta lighten that up a little bit. Lighten this up a little bit. Now when you get a good paper, you can like get in here and really, really scrub things because it's good paper. If you try to do this on a cheesy paper, it's going to peel and it's going to look like your clothing when it gets those narfy little balls on the cheap stuff because you had a cotton poly and the cotton got ripped up by the poly. It's kind of a pain in the butt. Same thing happens with your paint on crappy paper. You can have the best paint, the best brushes, but if you have crappy paper, it's all for naught. And you're painting, sometimes you're doing the coolest painting, you think you're doing a great job, and it'll just come out like crap. And you're like, oh man, what did I do to ruin that? And it wasn't you at all, it was just you used crappy paper. Crappy paints are just frustrating most of the time because you can't get the pigments to work out. They don't have enough color in them, they don't have enough pigment, and they're just really pale, and they won't flow as nice and they won't be as nice to play with. They're frustrating, but crappy paper is frustrating and it just destroys things. Most of all, it can destroy your confidence because you think, oh, I suck. And it has nothing to do with that at all. It's just that you had crappy paper. And sometimes I have the coolest ideas and I have a crappy paper day and it's like, oh man. I'll be testing it out of paper and it's like, oh, this is going great. Oh, this is crappy paper. And then I never want to use it again. Sometimes I'll save some of those though just for testing or for scrapping, or I'll use them as filler in between other things, but it can be a real pain in the booty when it's just a crappy piece. It can be heartbreaking. Bad brushes, well, you can do a lot with a cheap crappy brush. So, but when you have a nice brush, it's like, oh. That's why I like my Rosemary and Company brushes. Ooh, too much water there. Let's drown that out. Oop. You do have some leeway on watercolor to be able to do stuff like that. Let's try putting some of that back in there again. You'll also notice when I pull that off, sometimes you get some really cool effects. And by the time I've lined some of this, you can see that I've taken away some of the look that it's pure graphite or pencil line, because I've covered most of it up. And I'm just adding some of the little bit darker flesh on the lines and some of the areas where I think the light's going to hit differently, like underneath and inside she's going to be a little darker here. Underneath in any of the creases she's going to be a little darker, so I darken her up a little bit. Down as she gets on the plant, that also is going to be a little darker. Okay. We'll give that a break again for a minute. We'll go back to our greens. I do like Gulf and I do like Ocean Greens. Gulf is pretty dark. Ocean Greens is dark, but it's got extra sparkle, so. Probably save that more towards the end. You'll see these colors layer over the top of each other really well. You have to wait till the paint's dry before you put a coat over it. If you don't, it's going to smear. If you wait till it's well dry, you have a chance to paint over it before it gets muffy, because it will start lifting just like the color did down on our skin. If I start adding wet paint in, you can actually accidentally lift a paint you want to keep. So you want to make sure it's really dry, and you've got to control the water on your brush to get it to work also, to keep it that way. I'm doing a little bit of negative painting here. It's where you carve shapes out. So you can see some of those areas where I was just trying to make them more defined. And putting the paint around them will tend to sink it up around the edges and make it a little darker on the edges, which will make it define a little bit better. For some reason, I got that a little bumped out there. Sometimes you just got to turn things so you can keep an angle you feel more comfortable with. Lefties, you're probably going to turn it the other way. But usually you tend to do angles and curves better one way loose than the other way. You just got to change the angle of your paper around so you can do that. You'll be much happier you moved your paper than if you cut off your angle funky and get mad at yourself. So I'm not stuck with some of the shapes I have. You can see I'm redefining some of them and turning them into other shapes entirely. And that's the beauty of negative painting, because you can do that. You can carve things back out, redefine things so that they're not lost like you thought they were. Also gives you a chance to find things that are hidden in your picture that you never saw and didn't plan on, but you suddenly see them. And then you can accent them by negative painting them and bring them out and add extra meaning and cool stuff to your pictures. I got that a little wet. I thought I knocked off enough water, but I guess I didn't. It's still kind of wet. A little extra wet. See, it's still keeping some of those yellows that we put under there as extra highlights, even though I've covered them up, which is kind of nice. It's one of the reasons I do that. It's one of the reasons I use yellows. Sometimes I've had to fake it out even on pictures where I'm doing faces. And you just lost your white area and you need bright. So I'll add some yellow in. I might have to actually go get one of my golds. I have rose gold here. I have platinum bitch. I have a few others. We'll let that go for a minute and we'll just go look at our little hair. She's fairy. She's cool. We've used all these other colors, so I'm going to go back and use some of my reds from last month. And I'm going to add in some pretty pink. Oh, I've got kind of orangey with the red. I've got Gubino red. That's kind of a brownishy red. A red red. Ooh, red ochre's kind of orangey too. So let's go ahead and we'll just add some color. And that looks pretty close to her body color, so that's not as exciting. Okay, I might have to go back in with one of my brighter ones yet later, but I've got some. The purple red's really bright. red in there now. Oh, so grumpy, the little computer. I like a good red hair, but a lot of times red stands out if it's got some orange or some goldish in there. So let's add some of this. I'm going to go back and use that same yellowy color we've been using. It's got a little bit of gold in it too. We're going to give her a little highlight in her hair there. Just make it cool. I can go back in there after and add a little bit more reds, which I probably will. And who doesn't like a good pink cheek? So let's go add a little bit of pink to her cheek. I'm going to use one of the subdued pinks. I've got this really, really nice, this bright, vibrant pink is really cool, but she looks a little more demure down there, so we're just going to add a little bit of pink in there. Gonna have to get the right amount. Might do better with a little bit smaller brush. Part of it's wetting my paint down enough to pick up the color. Okay. Now on this, she can be kind of a seed. She can be sitting on a flower. She can be sitting on the ground. If we have her sitting on the ground, we could use some more green to make it look like she's on a hill. If we want to think that she's really teeny and she's on a flower, we can make this the top of the flower and start doing that. If we want her to be underground, we could just add some more browns in there and leave the ground above her and let her float in. But I'm thinking we might want to just put her as the fancy middle of a fancy flower, which could be cool. I'm going to go ahead now. She's starting to dry off a little bit up top, so I'm going to go ahead and put in some of these other accents I want to use with this green. I love this ocean green. It actually has a lot of sparkle, and you're probably not going to be able to see that on the video. But you can see even as I add more color on top, it's still leaving some of my highlights and my other things underneath, which is why, yeah, you can, depends what I'm doing. Sometimes I do a lot of stuff where it's just one solid color, but sometimes it's fun to layer the colors and get the richness and depth that you get from doing that. But I like that nothing's ever lost. So the other colors I've put underneath are just enhancing the ones that I've got on top. They aren't lost. This lets me use the little bit shiny color too to add a little bit of extra shine, because it'll sparkle a little bit more, which is always nice on a top coat coming from a car and motorcycle person. Yeah, sparkle is good. You just kind of go with what feels good. Some days it looks like a 3-year-old painted it, and there's nothing wrong with that. And some days it looks like, wow, did I do that? We all have those days. Anybody that says otherwise, lying. Not everything you do is gold. Sometimes, some days, not even close to being gold. And some days it's like, whoa, awesome, look at what I did. I can't believe that that came out of me. Not quite sure what I'm going to do with all my missing curlicues. I guess I can put those in later. Let's see what we get here. Actually, I could do that with this as well, but I might let it dry just a little bit longer. Oops, got gook on my fingers. All right. So, got a little cheek there. Got a little. Okay, I had to do a little bit of detail work. You can see I put the curlicues all in. I added some curlicues back since I had kind of covered them all up. I used the green that I'd been using, the really nice like ocean green, and just added in the curls. And then what I did is I took some really dark blue and brought out that line that I had created when we first did it, and just brought it out a little bit more along the edges and some of the in-betweens. So I just did that a little bit more. So you can see some of the blue edging. Smudge some out to get it to go back into the background. Darken some up a little bit more. I added a little bit more yellow down on the bottom. I think I've decided that I'm just going to have this be like the top inside of a flower, so I'm not going to worry about trying to put any petals in. Now, honestly, this picture could have taken a lot less time. We could have gone just like we did at the beginning with dropping in the paint and dropping in the paint. We could have even dropped in some paint in there. Then you could have taken a jelly roll, or I use a fountain pen a lot, or anything else, and just decorated out the lines that way you wanted to on there and added your curlicues. It would make your curlicues more distinct because you can get a lot nicer line with a pen. But this takes a little bit more time, but you get a little bit more depth in there with the multiple layers of the color, and they just look a little bit more real. Even here, I didn't put as many layers on her, but I've got a couple layers down in her hair and her body that make her look more like she's there. I added a little bit of brown and spread it out around her to look like some shading on there. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of re-wet down this area like we did at the beginning, and I'm going to drop in some more yellow, maybe some yellow ochre, a couple of browns, and see if we can make it look more like the top of a flower, like the inside of a sunflower or something, and just let that go. And we'll leave that a little bit more simple so that she stands out and her wings stand out. I didn't want to add any more to the background up top because I wanted her wings to really stand out, and let her stand out. And we'll just put some more color down at the bottom. But you could have kept it just really simple, just dropped in some color like we did, and it would have looked beautiful too. And then you could have just lined her. You didn't have to get this fancy. This gets a lot fancier to do it this way. But it gives a little bit different richness to the character and to your creation. So I did do the little bit of detail work. I didn't do it on camera just because I don't have enough space in here to twist it around to do it. I just kind of put it on my lap so I could get the finer curlicue lines. Hopefully that won't mess up too much. And we're just going to put some more in here. I've got some nice browns. This is kind of a nice brown that I have from my Xanadu that I really like. It's like a general purpose earth brown. It can be any kind of earthy thing. She has some amazing earth browns that she puts together, some weird ones that are kind of combinations of browny greeny colors. She's had a toad, she's had an earth green, she's had kind of some other stuff, and it just makes it really interesting because they make for good ground. They've got some brown, some green, some yellow, some other stuff in there. You can see I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm just adding in some stuff here. Probably highlight some more shadow in here, just a little bit more from her, and we'll just let it drip down and blend in with the picture a little bit. Got a pretty wet brush. I don't want to mess up too much of the detail we put in of her, but we can just kind of let her pop, but bring her down in there just a little bit more. Let her blend in. Now that I've got those browns going, I can go put some more yellows back in. But I've got that nice yellow in there already, so that makes it kind of nicer. We can add some seeds in if we want, either with some yellow or some more brown. She's Kind of gets her little own glow spot there. And gets more of that yellow that I like so well. Because this has a little bit of goldy in it too. At this point, I'm trying to think. Red, yellow, I'm gonna take some of the red ochre, or I could even use the red over here, the red ground. Those have some orangey red to them, and they'll make kind of an orangey reddish, brownishy spots. Now it's still pretty wet. You can see the water spreading pretty good still. We could come back and do this after even, and it'll make more distinct dots. Again, in this case, it's all about the richness of it. And to think, I thought this was going to be like a 15-minute video. Well, it would have been if I'd done it the other way. If I would have just filled it in and lined it, it would have been a 15-minute video. But if you want to spend a little bit of time and try something a little cooler, you can do this. Add a little bit more depth to it. It's getting a little dark, so I'm just gonna take that off in a little bit, make it go a little bit lighter in some spots, and we can add some highlights and stuff in a minute too. Now I do like my ink pen, so I will probably add some spots. I do need to get that to dry a little bit before that. I do like my fountain pen. I've got a nice Lamy that I use all the time. I do have other ones, but I love my Lamy. Oh, I could do that. That might work better. I'm going to use my Stabilo instead, I think. I'm going to use the Stabilo. And it'll stay more watercolory, less inky, because I kind of like how she's coming out. And we'll just add some more detail to her here. This is kind of a graphite watercolor pencil, so it's kind of interesting. It works kind of like a cross between the two of them. I can wet it down and spread those out a little bit if I want, although I'm not sure if I want to. But I might. And it would let me highlight anything else I wanted to on here as well. Although I'm pretty happy with everything else, so maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just take my little one and spread those out just a little bit. Turn them more into seed spots. It's still pretty wet, so they're give the illusion of seed. Just adds another layer of depth on there for us. You can see I can pull a little or a lot of color out of there too. For as much as those lines are, I could wet them down and drag out even more. It's already started to dry over here where that was still really wet. You can see this is a lot drier over here. so it's not spreading quite the same. Come to think of it, this might be a nice way to do watermelon. Do an edge on it. You can see I haven't put any fixative or anything on here. If I added too much water, I would get more of the other colors mushing and spreading together, but as long as you let it dry in between, you can do a lot of stuff, and it will react better too. Just going to take some of that graphite from a couple of these dots, take some of the extra, and I'll just add a little bit more depth in here for her too. This is basically what I did up on the petal wings, only I did it with watercolor paint, as I kind of just went up and went around it to darken it in and make it pop a little bit from the background. That's kind of what I'm just using the Stabilo for right here. Just go over some of those lines without making them too much. If I went over these with the Stabilo, it gives me just a little bit too thick of a line, where if I steal a little from the dots, it makes it a little bit easier. Gives me a similar effect. You should wait till this is all dry before you add in your extra highlights, but where is my white pen? There it is. But I could add some, could start adding some. I've just got one of the old Sharpies, which I don't understand they don't make any more water-based paint. I do have some other markers, but this one has a pretty nice fine tip, so it's a lot of fun. And these are pretty dry, so I don't have to worry nearly as much about messing with these as I do down there, where it would cause me some potential problems. Kind of wishing I hadn't done that line. It kind of messed me up. That's why I went further to try to adjust it. Sometimes I hate adding the white because I'm worried I'm going to do something crazy like that. And then other times I definitely don't put as much highlight on as a lot of other people do. Sometimes it's nice to have highlights. Sometimes it just kind of just makes you sad. I'm trying to think of what I can do about that. I'm going to let it sit for a minute while I do this. And add some down in here. I think I do want to add some in here too. Since I kind of have those going on all the swirlies, might as well have them kind of going on all the swirlies. Yep, kind of don't like how that came out. I feel like I messed up my really pretty wing with the white. Darn it. Sometimes that happens. But I have other cheats too, so let's pull out some other cheats. I've got some sparkly markers, which you might have some at home also, and some other color markers. I'm not seeing all of them here. Why not? Where are they? Okay, let's see. I've got some green, blue, gold. That's always a good start. You can go back over some of those with paint as well, and the white will fill in, which I might try in just a second, since I'm really, really sad that I messed that up. And I don't quite like that line. I like the cleaner lines the way they were before. I thought they were nicer. There will never be a perfect piece ever, and sometimes you can turn mistakes into other things. As Bob Ross says, there are no mistakes, just happy little accidents. And sometimes it's just a matter of making them less obvious. You can make them less annoying to yourself, which is what I'm going to kind of do here, I think. So that'll give me a little bit of texture underneath now, but instead of it being blaringly obnoxious, I can tone it back down a little bit. You can see that my watercolor paints kind of go right over the top of it, so no big deal. It's not going to be quite as fancy as it was before, but I can smooth it out quite a bit. And you can do that for any of those areas that you thought were just a little overdone here. And just do the same thing. You just add some of the color back in. Then it still does what you wanted it to do. It has the effect of being a highlight, but without being a crazy, obnoxious highlight that was driving you nuts. So there, it looks more like a highlight. It has a little bit of texture without being totally crazy. And there we go. I think I'm going to fill that in a little bit too. So they look more like they blend in with this. Bring back some of that dark. I know that sounds weird, but we'll bring some of that dark back in there. I think I'm going to do the same thing down here. Don't think I like quite how that came out either. So we're going to darken that back up a bit. You can still see it. Sometimes it's just a matter of distracting your eye away from whatever it was that was driving you nuts. So I'm still getting a lot of the highlight effect, even if I paint over that lightly, without it being glaring. Some say I'm playing. Like I say, I do have an embarrassing number of paints, but you're like, well, Penny, why did you just put those all on there if you're going to erase them? Well, because sometimes you're like, you know, they aren't quite working for me the same way I thought they were going to. So, just going to make them less annoying. Okay, I've got too much water on my brush right now. I got to take some of that off. Got a little too gung-ho. All right. Better, better, better. So you can see the highlights, but they're not quite glaring anymore. Sometimes you have to try it to know that that's not what you like. Yeah, but then you see, well, look, I can fixie that up a little bit too, and it didn't kill anything, and it's still pretty interesting, and it added some extra texture still without being totally annoying. So there we go. Although I won't lie, at this point, I think I might almost leave it. I do have the Uniball Signo, but it's a roller ball and it tends to get stuck and it leaves double lines and does some weird stuff sometimes. We'll just add a little bit of highlight to these seeds. Since we have the dark side, we'll have a little bit of light side. Okay. Could probably put some more on her, but okay. So I didn't even use my glitter markers. I just reused my paints. And I like how that came out better, I think. Put a little bit more red purple back up here in her hair. Just darken that up a little bit. Alright. Well, I think at this point I'm going to let her dry and call her done. So, alright.